very much for your participation. My name is Laura Robotti, and I'm here proud to present the second session of this morning. So I will start introducing you Mrs. Roberta Morelli. I invite you to come here together with the councillor at Brescia municipality with equal opportunity schools delegation at this municipality, and then I will call here as well the three young participants of the day: Gaia Maestri, Isabella Pluma, and Matilde Tubaro. You can take a seat. Okay. Okay. Yes, we. Okay, so we can now start with the introduction of the greetings of the municipality of Brescia, coming from Mrs. Morelli, who will also explain us what our municipality is doing in terms of equal opportunity, familiar policies, youth policies, and time for the city. So we can start.
Grazie. Io parlo in italiano, quindi bisognerà...
Translate directly.
Bene, grazie. Io vi ringrazio per questo invito e porto il saluto dell'amministrazione comunale e del nostro sindaco. Io sono assessore, come diceva la signora, alla scuola, alle pari opportunità, alle politiche giovanili e ai tempi e orari della città.
Here is the representative of Ms. Marelli of the municipality of Brescia, and she is the person entitled with the delegation of this municipality for the policies regarding family, regarding youth, and equal opportunities and time of the city.
Vi ringrazio di aver scelto Brescia per il vostro convegno, che ho visto è un convegno molto importante e spero che abbiate la possibilità di visitare la nostra città, che è diventata uno dei siti UNESCO 2 anni e mezzo fa.
In this meeting, Marelli is very happy and proud that Brescia can have such a meeting here, held internationally, and we hope that you have the chances to visit the areas and surrounding, and also consider that Brescia is now participating in the UNESCO title in the world basis.
Come dicevo, fa parte dei siti UNESCO proprio legati ai Longobardi e costituisce insieme ad altri 6 siti proprio quest'unico grande sito sui Longobardi. È una linea che parte dalla provincia di Varese, sono 7 siti della provincia di Varese e arriva fino al sud Italia.
Is a kind of network of Longobardian areas that start in Varese province and follows up touching different cities including Brescia.
Ieri ho assistito alle vostre bellissime premiazioni, devo dire che mi sono commossa anch'io vedendo con quanta emozione le donne che avete premiato sono salite sul palco e mentre appunto assistevo alle premiazioni ho potuto fare una serie di riflessioni, tra cui la principale è che le donne sono davvero brave.
Yesterday, Marelli is participating to the Donna Leader Premium, so Woman Leader Premium, and she's very happy to see how many very, let's say, entrepreneurial and clever and smart women exist and can be made in our city.
davvero brave perché sanno valorizzare le capacità, le professionalità delle altre donne, le sanno riconoscere e premiare, come appunto è avvenuto ieri sera, e sanno poi pensare alle difficoltà delle altre donne. Sto pensando a tutta la rete di organizzazioni femminili di cui mi occupo come assessore alle pari opportunità, che si occupano di violenza, che si occupano di problematiche legate alle donne nell'ambito della vita familiare, della vita lavorativa, e quindi veramente le donne sono capaci di pensare a tutto e al mondo femminile proprio in modo completo e organico.
One consideration for Ms. Marelli was that in fact women take care of the families, take care of very difficult situations, sometimes having to handle with violence, for example, inside the families, and she knows very well because we presented a delegation on this municipality working on that. And this is very important that all recognize the ability of women to deal with such type of problems.
Intervento dicendo dalla crisi non si esce senza le donne, quindi credo che questo sia da riprendere e rilanciare proprio come dettato.
Okay, so these are the greetings for the municipality of Brescia, and also to be remarked the fact that the praise that has been given yesterday by Ms. Bandera, the fact that from crisis we don't go out without women. So this is the point that is worth to mention again, and this is our strongest to be discussed also today and discovered again.
Grazie. La prossima volta mi attrezzerò con l'inglese.
La prossima volta Young, that I'm proud to present. They represent our future, as been said by Robert Frost. I learn from youth because they are the future, and this is the reason why this session is dedicated to them. So I'm very happy to present Gaia Maestri. PhD students at the Dartmouth University in the UK, Matilde Zubani, of economics, and Isabella Vierma, studying communication and cultural management at the Friedrichshafen University. Okay, so I will start with Gaia Maestri.
Can you hear me now? Welcome back everybody, and thank you for being here. I'm really pleased to open this session on young people and Europe. And I'm really grateful for being here at this wonderful conference. I really thank you, the organizers. My presentation is about the European citizenship and new member states. And mainly I'm focusing on the case of Bulgaria and Romania towards and beyond formal membership. I have to say that when we talk about new member European states in 2013, we should talk about Croatia maybe, but I think there are more data about Bulgaria and Romania in order to kind of study how the access and the joining of the European Union is working out. And I also want to stress the fact that I'm going to look beyond formal membership. This means that we are of course here to celebrate the 20 years of the Maastricht Treaty, which officially and formally established the citizenship of the European Union. However, I do think that it's really important to focus on the practices and the substantive aspect of the European citizenship in order to kind of assess how it is working. So I'm starting with this quote, which I took from the website of the European Council, that says that the aim of European citizenship is to strengthen and to consolidate the European identity. And it goes on saying by greater involvement of the citizens in the community integration process. And I think that this quote is particularly important because it kind of creates a link between the European citizenship and European identity. So we can understand how important it is to look at European citizenship in order to understand what kind of European identity it is emerging. And this is precisely the question I'm asking with this presentation, which is trying to understand what kind of European identity is emerging from the current practices of European citizenship. As I already mentioned before, there are different ways of understanding what citizenship means. We can of course understand citizenship in a formal way, so the definition of European citizenship in legal terms. But there are of course also aspects, there are substantive aspects, and namely practices of citizenship. And there is a huge debate about what practice means, but I will just mention here that the way I mean it in this presentation is basically the way the European member states put into practice the protection of formal rights of European citizens, so the way the national member states regulate and manage the rights of the new European citizens. So this is a brief outline of my presentation, just to give you an idea of what I'm going to do. First, we're going to give you a brief introduction to the history of European citizenship with a focus on the main treaties and the rights of the European citizens. Then I'm going to point out a couple of problematic aspects. The first is the procedural definition, I already mentioned earlier, and then I'm basically going to focus on the freedom of movement, so the free movement rights of European citizens. And I'm going to do that by looking at two specific cases, which are Bulgaria and Romania, and I'm going to look specifically into the requirement of work permits for citizens that are citizens of these two former new member states. And then I'm going to look at the deportation of Romani EU citizens. The Roma, just to be clear, are the groups that are usually called as gypsies or nomads. And then I'm going to draw a few conclusions. So just to begin with the European Union citizenship, 7th of February 1992, the member states of the European Union joined together to sign the Maastricht Treaty, basically to go beyond the sheer economic objective of the European Union and to build a political institution by, for instance, strengthening the democratic legitimacy of the Union and building the monetary union. And here I'm quoting again from the website of the European Union that says that one of the major innovations established by the treaty is the creation of a European citizenship over and above national citizenship. And here, quoted on the slide, says that every citizen who is a national of a member state is also a citizen of the Union. So basically, we can find, yes, a definition, but at the same time, it's a definition that still relies upon the definition of the national member states. So, depending on the nationality laws of the member state, if you are a second generation migrant and you were born in France, then you have the chance to become a European citizen. Whereas if you are born in Italy, you have not this chance. And this was actually confirmed in 1997 with the Amsterdam Treaty that says that the question whether an individual possesses the nationality of a member state shall be settled solely by reference to the national law of the member state concerned. So here we find a tricky point because, of course, it is a kind of patchy citizenship. If you're a third country national and you have a child, if your child is born in France, it can be European citizens. Otherwise, in another country, it cannot be. And here I'm basically going to talk about the right to free movement, which was first established in 1957 with the Treaty of Rome. At that time, the right to free movement was basically given to people who were employed, and were workers, and also to their family members. So there was a strict relation between the right to free movement and the occupational status. In 1985, there was the Schengen Treaty, which at the time was different from the European Community. Which basically abolished the internal border control. So basically, if you were a citizen of a member of the Schengen Treaty, you were not subject to subject control if you wanted to move among those countries. In 1986, there was the Single European Act that created the single market. They created the objective to create a single market, and this single market was actually established in 1992 with the Maastricht Treaty that I've already mentioned before, that established the European citizenship and that established the freedom of movement as a right to which European citizens are entitled to. And then in 1997 there was the Amsterdam Treaty, which incorporated the Schengen Treaty into the European Union, which means that if you are a European citizen, you can move, and if the country you're a member of, you're a citizen of, is also part of the Schengen Treaty, you're not subject to internal border controls. And it is also important to say that there is a shift from the relation of the freedom of movement and your occupational status to linking the freedom of movement to your status as a citizen, which means that you don't need to be a worker anymore to freely move or freely reside in another country of the European Union, but you also can simply be a European citizen that just decide to live in a different country without the need to work, but of course you have to show that you've got sufficient resources and you're not going to become a burden for the welfare state. And here I'm going to point out a few problematic aspects that are actually related to the freedom of movement, because as already said, the freedom of movement is not linked anymore to the occupational status, and that is true, but at the same time, for certain new member states, there are work permits that are required for new European citizens. So, to some extent, this affects the freedom of movement of these new European members. And there is also the directive, which is on the right of citizens of the Union and their family members to move and reside freely within the territory of the member states, that actually says that it is possible to expel a European citizen on the basis of specific conditions, such as this person become a threat to public security and health, or becomes a burden on welfare system. So, in these 2 points, we actually see a sort of exception to the freedom of movement of European citizens. And I decided to focus on these 2 aspects, looking at the case of Bulgaria and Romania. But before going into discussion of these 2 points, I'm giving you just a few data about the joining application and process of these 2 countries. They applied to join the European Union in 1995, right after Poland and Hungary, but the procedure was slightly delayed compared to these 2 countries because initially they did not meet the required access standards, mainly in terms of corruption and minority protection. But this was eventually sorted, so in 2005 they signed the Treaty of Accession, which was confirmed in 2006. So they became European member states on the 1st of January of 2007. At the same time, there are specifically for these 2 countries exceptional working visa regime that require the workers coming from these 2 countries to have a specific work permit to work in other parts, in other member states of the European Union. The same thing was done for the 2004 enlargement, which means that European member states adopted a specific working visa regime for the members of countries such as Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic. But these restrictions were lifted in 2008, whereas now we are in 2013 and still in 8 European member countries there are still restrictions for Romania, Bulgaria, and from this year also Croatia, of course. And and also another difference, was that for the enlargement of 2004, UK did not join this restriction, but in the case of Romania and Bulgaria, they decided to join. So in the case of these 2 countries, we find restrictions also to go to Ireland and to the UK. At the same time, it is a kind of patchy system, and so in the slide there is actually a mistake, it's until the 31st of December, not January. So at least until the end of this year there will be a restriction in at least 8 European members countries. And for instance in France and UK, these work permits basically require working visa for unskilled workers. But as for instance in Belgium, Austria and Germany, these permits basically target highly skilled migrants. And I think it is important to see this because we see, for instance, in France, it mainly targets unskilled workers. In other countries, it targets other kind of workers. In Italy, until the 1st of January 2012, we used to target both unskilled and skilled workers. So we might end up to have a sort of patchy mobility of these new migrants that come from Eastern European countries. And this for sure, if we think about the link I mentioned at the beginning between European citizenship and European identity, then if we have different patterns of mobility, then we may end up having different different sorts of European identity that develop in different areas of Europe. So this is the first issue. The second one is the deportation of Romani European citizens. Just to give you a few data, the Roma people are about 10 to 12 million around Europe, and Romania and Bulgaria only account for 2 million. So it is a huge percentage of these people living in these two countries that accessed the European Union in 2007. And it is not hard to believe that Western European countries might have been, mainly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, being slightly concerned about the westward migration of these groups that are one of the most discriminated communities around Europe. They are really poor, and mainly through an analysis of practices rather than analysis of the formal definition of the European citizenship. And this is because of the limitation I pointed out earlier about the focusing on the formal definitions. So basically my conclusion would be that, again, I think to assess and to study the European citizenship, therefore what kind of European identity is emerging, nowadays it's again important to look at the national practices rather than European and supranational practices, because still the nation state apparently holds the power to shape the future European identity. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Gaia. The question that arises in my mind is how many extension a European citizen is really a European citizen, or it exists, it seems to be so, as far as I have understood at least, to Matilde Giovanni, who's presenting us an intervention regarding Erasmus, a great opportunity for Europe and for the building of a European citizenship.
Buongiorno a tutti, good morning everybody. I'm very happy to be here today in Brescia, that is my hometown, so I've been around Europe for a while and it's always good to be home. So thank you very much for inviting me here. As you can see from the title of the presentation, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Erasmus program, and this was the subject of my dissertation that I had at the London School of Economics and Political Science. A quick outline of the content of this presentation. I will first give you an insight of what the Erasmus program is, relying on some facts and figures. Then we will go back to 25 years ago when the Erasmus program was launched, and we will see which was the goals that Erasmus was meant to achieve over 25 years' time. Then we will move more into my personal research about this topic, and we will look at the students' perspective on the program, so their motivation and the outcome they report. And then we will try to drive a conclusion and assessing, if possible, the success of this program and having some thoughts for the future that we hope that for Erasmus will be still bright. So this first slide aims to present you the Erasmus program in its actual shape. As you may already know, the Erasmus is an exchange program which involves more than 4,000 higher education institutions in 33 European countries, allowing the mobility of both students and lecturers. Erasmus was launched 25 years ago, and 25 years ago, 3,000 students were involved in the project, while today they are 252,000. And at the very beginning, only 11 countries participated, while now there are 33. The Erasmus benefit from the financial support of the European Union, which provides each student involved in the program a monthly grant that is meant to cover the difference of living costs between the home university and the host university abroad. The average grant is currently 252 euros, and the average duration of the exchange period is around 6 months. I would like you to notice that even if the countries involved in the program are 33, it is particularly interesting to notice that the space of movement is actually very narrow between the top sending country and the top receiving country. Two more data that can help us getting the flavor of the program: age and gender. The average age of the students involved is 22 years and a half, and there is a slight majority of women involved. So Erasmus was launched in 1987 by the Council of Ministers, and here you can see a few lines from the official document pointing out which were the goals designed for Erasmus. Maybe, I'm not sure if you knew that, but Erasmus is not only referred to the Great Humanist Erasmus Desideri, but is also an acronym standing for European Community Action Scheme for Mobility of University Students. From the text report here, you can see that the primary objective of Erasmus was to create an adequate pool of graduates able to interact in a large socioeconomic space of the EU, having gained a direct experience of intra-community cooperation. So, what was Erasmus meant for? During these 24 years, the scholar literature about Erasmus has flourished, and especially because there was the widespread feeling that the objective of the Erasmus was not so clear at the institutional level. And this, of course, offered a great opportunity to many of us, maybe, to write about that. And in this case, I would say that why was important to define the meaning of Erasmus? Because the educational policy, if effective, is meant to have a significant larger impact on a series of socioeconomical related behavior. And also, why not? We have to mention that there is also the question of a spending review, because the budget destinated to Erasmus was 130 billion euros per year. So the question of why are we doing this program was not meaningless. And different scholars have worked to evaluate its relevance, and you can see here as a pushing force for subsequent mobility, the construction of a European identity, the development of the integrated European labor market, and there are already few of them saying that Erasmus has been overstated, because it seems not to have a great impact on the feeling of European identity experienced by the students afterwards, or their support for the EU institution. So I was on my way to write the EWMD paper on Erasmus, and I asked myself what could have made the difference. And I decided to look at Erasmus under an anthropological perspective, maybe, and to propose an insight into the personal dimension of the Erasmus student. So I decided to approach Erasmus under a phenomenological approach, and the aim of this approach is to identify the phenomena through how they are perceived by the actors in the situation, so in this case, the Erasmus student themselves, and make the translators to gathering deep information and perception through inductive and qualitative methods. So basically what I did was run an interview with former Erasmus students who have spent their Erasmus term in Italy about 10 years ago, believing that 10 years ago was a kind of suitable span of time in order to develop a professional profile. In order to make easier to understand the findings I found with my interview, I decided to draw upon two archetypical student types, the pragmatic students and the sentimental students, aiming that they could have well represent the tension and the controversy of the definition of the Erasmus. So here you can see a portrait of two maybe stereotypically pragmatic students, and a list of the motivation of why these students could have been inspired to go to Italy. So, for example, to study in a well-known university. Even if most of our students now are going to study abroad, I have to say that we have some in Italy, so this could be a good reason. Or to go deeply at the root of a particular subject, to work on a specific dissertation topic that is linked to the territory and the country they choose, to fulfill the course requirement, because in few educational systems like the UK, having an exchange period abroad is compulsory for those that are, for example, graduating in foreign language. Or to improve their CV, or to become fluent in Italian, and why not? I mean, being pragmatic, it doesn't mean only to study hard. It means also to make good use of your time. And so I have to say that I received a few confessions of people saying, when you are an Erasmus student, you are in a kind of privileged situation. So why not take a ride and a chance to sit easier exams? And on the other hand, we have the sentimental students. You can see it's a very different setting. And as I was focusing on Italy, I have to say that probably it was the good case study to observe. Because the reason why to choose Italy for the Erasmus program are not directly linked only to the academia or the working hours, but I have to say it's important to mention that they are not less important than the one we mentioned before. And now I will try to explain you why. So, a few people decided to come to Italy because they have visited Italy before, for example on holiday, or because also they have a kind of romantic portrait of this country. The lovely sound of the Italian language, the uniqueness of the Italian culture, but also, I mean, we don't have to think that going into Erasmus is just going to a wild adventure in a far and remote country. For most people, it's just the idea that they are afraid of going abroad and they want to go somewhere closer in space but also in culture. So I had many, for example, students from Germany saying that Italian was a neighboring country and they were feeling safe not to go too far. Or students from Spain is saying, oh, you know, the life there looked to me similar than the one I could have at home, so why not? It's a starting point maybe, but so I started pointing out a few motivations why going abroad. But let's now move to the outcomes, because we wanted to assess the success of this Erasmus experience. And as you can see in this slide, categories has fallen apart. Because I have to say that 100% of the students I interview have come together to a very positive evaluation of the program. And what is important to notice is that the motivation they brought in are very different. And if you were now to say, oh, this motivation seems to me more sentimental, yeah, it should come from the girl sitting there at the bottom of the Pisa Tower, you might discover that maybe the outcome that say, I'm married to an Italian now I live here, at the very beginning came here just to improve her CV or get a better job back home. Let's try to drive now some conclusion. Thinking about the framework I presented about the Erasmus and a few details about the interview I ran that I don't have time now to develop that much, we can try to think which are the criteria to assess the success or the failure of this program. Can time be sufficient criteria? I have to say that the space of one generation, 20 or 25 years, seems to me a bit too little to assess the failure of a policy scheme intended to work on multiple levels. Can money be the criteria of assessing success? Have we spent too much or too little? Someone has claimed that despite the academic purposes behind the Erasmus, there is the real danger of misusing public funds to finance leisure pursuits. Or are the results the best criteria to assess the success of students' mobility freely? And between those, we will probably find this experience a must, or that we'll have this experience taking it for granted, not even perceiving it as something special. So, let's be optimistic and think that the Erasmus generation might probably be the first generation of European citizens. Thank you.
Now I will introduce you. This is Isabella Biermann, that is presenting us networking between generations, the EWMD survey between inter and intra-generation networking. Please.
Actually, you're expecting Isabella to talk, and she will talk, no doubt. Let me just give you a short introduction about what she's talking about. I hope most of the EWMD members being here now have filled in the questionnaire on which the presentation is based. So you might remember some of the questions, but of course you will understand some of the answers. As many of you have been in Mayamsen last year in Tirol, you might remember the motion brought in by the SEMS, the senior experts members. Some of us are here today, you will recognize us on the little star on the name tag. And the SEMS are a group of very experienced and very long members of EWMD. And we found that in the last years of our professional career, with the topics we share within EWMD, the attitudes which we have to the things discussed in EWMD have changed a little, not very much, but a little. And as some of you might know, that there, especially older women, tend to leave the careers and their companies after a certain time, we thought it would be a danger if we leave EWMD without giving on our experience. This is why this motion was brought in last year. We have an own work group in EWMD International. You will find our office on EWMD International, and of course everybody is invited to come and join us, especially those ladies 55 and plus. This was a very good example of cooperation between younger and older women. Isabella did this survey in close cooperation with the SEM group and is showing now what cooperation between old and young can really achieve. Thank you.
Hello. I'll spare you with any information about myself that you can read in the little booklet, as we have a bit of a time management issue. So I'd like to introduce you to this survey. We conducted it to find out what the expectations are, and our aims when conducting the survey were mostly to examine the success of the current activities offered at EWMD, to examine the contentedness of the members, to become aware of the missing aspects, and to improve EWMD in accordance to the mandate. So, just a small pie chart with some data. 96 participants took part, which is 12% of the total EWMD membership. It's a large amount in comparison to the return of normal surveys, so we're quite happy. As you can see, a large group from Germany participated. This is probably also because it initiated from the German group, so was expected. What's interesting is that the participation does reflect the national structure of the chapters, so this is sort of how the amount of members that are in each of the chapters are divided. Out of the survey, we took up the most important things to present today, and we thought it was quite interesting what expectations were outed. For example, that increased support, more exchange, more internationality or just internationality in general, contact details and contact exchanges, meeting other leaders, of course, and interaction with other women were the most important expectations that came out. Also, what's important is that these expectations have been met by for most of the women. Our findings. So there were some contradicting findings that resulted from this survey, and we thought that it would be interesting to present these today, maybe also so that you can think about it and maybe take it with you outside of this conference room and maybe speak about it and exchange with others what they think. So some food for thought, as we like to call it. We had the expectation for more internationality, or the proclamation for more internationality, and there's a very large German-speaking domination in this network, which by many members was, let's say, members said that it wasn't necessarily what they expected from this international network. However, it's interesting that the internationality has been met for most of the members, and at the same time they are saying that there's too much Germany, too German dominated. So we're a bit confused. What do you mean? Maybe you can explain this in more detail to us. In addition, the age-related aspects. So on the one hand, everyone, or nearly everyone that took part in the survey explained that they want more younger members to take part at EWMD so that the exchange becomes more refreshed and it takes a different turn. At the same time, the subjects that are discussed are often discussed too often. The people are sick of the subjects, but the subjects that the people are sick of are the ones that interest the younger members. So some kind of contradicting aspect there as well, which is to think about. In addition, there's an increased input requested, but EWMD is too time-consuming. So women want more people to interact, they want more meetings, but they don't have the time. So I don't exactly know how they want to do it, but possible answers will come in a second. And the last one is that who is requested by very many members. So members are interested in knowing more about other members in a sort of database, online, or in whatever way possible. But at the same time, the existing who is who profiles are not maintained and are not fed and nourished with new information that the members experience. So it's kind of hard to get both of those aspects in there. Next, I'd like to speak about just one of the graphics that we had from the survey. What disturbs members in the current knowledge exchange situation? So here you see again, the time-consuming aspect is very concerning for these members. The age difference, some people think it's kind of annoying, and that it's unofficial is also a bit of a problem for some people. In addition, limited access to information. So that again goes back to the website, the who is who and everything, which has to be worked on by you yourself. The language barrier, that sometimes English is not spoken to an equal proficiency by all the members, or maybe that some of the languages are not spoken at all by other members or understood at all. The distance, of course, but that's part of the international network. It's difficult to have an international network where everyone is in the same place. And seldom meetings, which comes back to the time-consuming aspect, which goes back to our contradiction. The inefficiency, which of course can be spoken about in more detail also outside of this room, but is also largely due to members themselves making comments. And that the IT is not modern enough was criticized, and member profiles are incomplete. Goes back to the who is who. Right. Do the members actively take part in local, national, and international events? Yes. This makes us happy. Good. The improvements that have been requested are as follows. Professional IT usage, of course. Everyone likes professional IT, and it makes things a lot easier. It makes work more efficient, more effective. Time-consuming aspect is a big problem through professional IT usage or increased professional IT usage. This could be reduced. The marketing and representation in public. The exchange with younger members. I don't need to elaborate on this. The younger members in general, so an increased inclusion of younger members to participate. Updated profiles, connections to other networks, political involvement potentially, and a clear mission statement. The special demands on IT are as stated here: Skype, more website usage, marketing, learning about new media, Twitter, I heard that name hashtag. So I think that we are already on the way to become more professional in the IT usage. Maybe this would also increase with an increased young member interaction. The data shows that the distinctive demands to increase the quantity of younger members is wished for. So this includes incorporation of younger members in meetings, in interactions, in these 7 workshops, the exchange programs, the involvement, also that younger members like us right now say something from a different perspective and There's a bit of a problem of a lack of age range, so there's a wish for an extended age range. Now I will speak about the proposals for improvement briefly. So of course, more practical matters and less theory. It's easier said than done. Practical matters, of course, can be addressed in such situations like we are here today. Theory is often very difficult to take part in if you're not completely familiar with the topic. So more practical matters, increased collaboration with men. As I saw today, 2 men presented. I think that's one step towards the increased collaboration. More internationality. Okay, I think this is very interesting because the network is already very international, but there's a wish for more internationality. So maybe you can propagate this in your own countries and try to increase it. The less time-consuming activities can also be reached through increased IT usage, for example, through Skype conferences or input. And their motivational factors is to reduce the fees. They also do it because they like the friendship aspect. They like the interesting contacts, the exchange with other members, active networking, more perspectives on different topics. This goes back to including more younger members. They are interested in intercultural exchange, coaching, personal development, trends in management, entrepreneurship, and economic subjects. Of course, at a certain age, you're no longer interested in things like work-life balance, how to combine motherhood with job. 55 plus, the chances of becoming a mother are a bit lower. The career-related topics are also somewhat unnecessary or redundant. Discrimination, female-only topics, and the question, why are certain subjects no longer interesting, were answered with discussed too often in the years and they do not concern us anymore. Right. Now I'd like to go back to all the EWMD members and to the surveys that we conducted. We conducted 2 in total, 3 in total, but 2 that we used. And all the participants said that they value EWMD for its international context, for the curiosity of new topics, for the interpersonal contacts, for supporting business contacts, valuable exchange of knowledge, experience, and expertise, and for networking. And I think these are very important values that you should all take with you as well. And I'd like to hear more about maybe EWMD members themselves, what they think about the topics that I've just mentioned, about the problems, about the controversies, and maybe some interesting new findings from members who maybe did not find the time to take part in the survey will help us improve EWMDs in the future. Thank you very much.
Coming into